Histories and voices that are intertwined, connected by one thread, building internet and communication community networks. In this podcast, you are going to listen to life stories of those who build innovative and bold community-led projects to connect the third of humankind that is still living offline. Hello, my name is Renata Porto. I'm from Brazil and I'll follow you along this 12-episode season. By the song opening our episode, you must already be thinking the country we will first travel to today, right? Yes, today I will present to you an experience straight from Mexico, the Wiki Katat, the first indigenous virtual operator providing internet and mobile phone services in the country.
Porque estoy totalmente segura que muchísimas mujeres a veces
I'm sure that for many women, it's not that we don't want to use technology. It's that sometimes we don't have the resources.
porque no quieramos hacer uso de las tecnologías, a veces no tenemos los recursos.
Desde el arte hasta las nuevas tecnologías, permitiéndonos recopilar historias.
From the arts to the new technologies, we are able to collect and gather histories, having all the information properly stored in digital media and also shared via the networks.
Ya almacenada en estos medios digitales y compartirla también, ¿no? A través de las redes.
In today's episode, you get to know Flor Lino, who is part of the Wiki Katat and also of a community indigenous radio station in Mexico. You will also meet Lilian Chamorro, who works in many organizations linked to the topic of community networks in Latin America.
Routing for Communities, an audio journey tracing community connectivity around the world.
La cooperativa Tosepan
The Tosepan Titataniski Co-op launched Wiki Katat, the first virtual operator managed by indigenous communities, offering telephone and internet services with prices starting at 50 pesos, and connects the inhabitants of the mountains of Sierra Norte de Puebla and the southern Veracruz state, once companies like Telmex, Movistar, and AT&T did not want to provide them with services, claiming it was not profitable.
y AT&T no quisieron darles servicios porque no les era rentable.
You just listened to a piece from the news outlet Sin Embargo that talks about Wiki Katat. This is a pioneer operator in Mexico providing indigenous communities mobile and internet access. You must be wondering, what does Wiki Katat mean? Well, the name comes from Nahuatl and Totonaco, indigenous languages, and it means come. In other words, it's an invitation for the communities to be part of cooperative and collective communications process. The Wiki Katat unites the work and aspiration of indigenous communities and represents a step towards technological autonomy. For a better understanding of how everything started and the characteristics of the region where Wiki Katat was founded, we talked to Flor Lino by video call.
Hola, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, te escucho. ¿Cómo estás?
Ay, bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, también.
Flor is Mexican, from the Mazewal people, and a member of the collective responsible for Wiki Katat, the Tosepan Union of Co-ops. She also works at Tosepan Limaxtum, the organization's radio station.
Bueno, hola, mi nombre es Floriberta Lino de Jesús. Soy de
Well,
una
hello, my name is Floriberta Lino de Jesus. I'm from a community called Tepetzalan in the state of Puebla, Mexico. I'm a proudly indigenous woman.
del estado de Puebla, país de México. Soy una mujer orgullosamente indígena.
Flor tells us that her community Tepetzalan means Cerro del Medio, Mirohil, in her mother language, the Nahuatl. The rural community where she lives is located 12 kilometers away from the municipality of Cuetzalan in the state of Puebla, which is in the central Mexican plateau. Tepetzalan is a very small community, around 400 inhabitants. The whole town has a little over 4,000 people. To help us meet their reality, Flor describes the typical clothing worn by the indigenous people.
Pues hay algo que nos identifica mucho, es que cuando llegas a Cuetzalan, los hombres...
Well, if there's something that identifies us a lot, is that when you arrive in Cuetzalan, the men wear blanket pants, a shirt, and their backpack, which is our taweloni. And the women carry their flowered sash, wear a long white skirt, and a work shirt, which is woven by artisan hands in patterns of different flowers and different animals that exist in the region.
Artesanas en diferentes flores, de diferentes animalitos que hay en la región.
Cuetzalan is part of the Mexican touristic route called Magical Towns, Pueblos Mágicos.
Pues Cuetzalan es un pueblo mágico, dicen que es mágico, porque cuenta con muchísimas cascadas, cerros.
Well, Cuetzalan is a magical town. They say it's magical because it has many waterfalls, hills, and Cuetzalan is green. There's a lot of vegetation. It has a wealth of flora and fauna. Normally, whenever someone comes to visit Cuetzalan, I always tell them, don't stay in central Cuetzalan, go to the communities, because that's where the good stuff really is. I'm talking about communities because it's a rural area, there are paths, there is a cornfield, there is coffee, creeks, and waterfalls. And the roosters usually wake you up in the morning, but also the morning birds, because they start tweeting at 5 in the morning. When the sun rises, they already wake you up. You don't even need an alarm.
Pues te despiertan los gallos, pero también las aves de la mañana porque empiezan a cantar desde las 5 de la mañana. Cuando sale el sol, ya te despiertan, no necesitas alarma.
The Tosepan Union of Co-ops comes from over 4 decades of struggles and collective work. It amounts over 40,000 indigenous families in more than 30 municipalities in the country. They work in areas such as organic production, mainly of coffee, pepper, and honey, microcredit, alternative tourism, healthcare, and community communication. Wiki Katat, launched in 2022, was a milestone for the union's 45th anniversary. The goal was to build information and communications technologies in a way to contribute to the construction of Yeknemilis in the Maceual language, which means buen vivir in Spanish or good living in English. Buen vivir is a concept that mobilizes various Latin American native peoples and is an alternative to Western models of development and progress. The Yeknemilis understands that it's necessary to prioritize the harmony between nature and humankind, having as a guide principles of social peace, solidarity, work, humility, and unity.
XHSIAE, Radio Tosepa Limaxtu 91.3 FM.
To explain how Wiki Katat came into being, Flor told us about the time she worked at the community radio station Tosepan Limaxitum. The joy of being able to work at the station, sharing with the communities, moved her as well as other young people to keep studying and contributing to the region. But an event interrupted the programming, not just in that small Mexican town, but in the whole world.
Breaking news in Mexico, though, this morning, where that country is confirming 2 cases of coronavirus. Health officials say one of the patients is in Mexico City, the others in the northern state of Sinaloa.
The COVID-19 pandemic hit Mexico and other Latin American countries like a storm in the first semester of 2020.
Llega la pandemia y estábamos preocupados porque hay algo que se empezó a dar mucho, es que los niños no estaban estudiando, ¿no?
The pandemic arrived and we were worried because there is something that began to happen a lot, which is the children were not studying. And that education was no longer free because now to have access to classes, you have to recharge 50 or 100 pesos, and those 100 pesos were meant for a kilo of sugar, they were for a kilo of beans. We have to start creating a social enterprise that would make us sustainable, thought of in our territory, and strengthening the social and solidarity economy of the communities. That was when our dream of having a community mobile operator was born, which is Wiki Katat.
Pensado en nuestro territorio y fortaleciendo la economía social y solidaria de las comunidades. Ahí fue en donde comenzó nuestro sueño de tener un operador móvil comunitario que es Wiki Katat.
From then on, a group of 7 young indigenous people who worked at the radio station started to take part in workshops to develop a project and to have meetings with Redes. This is a public-private Mexican company, having the state as its major shareholder, responsible for the Mexican shared telecom network. Redes works like this. It makes it available on the wholesale market the possibility for other companies or associations to offer telephone and internet services for retail consumers under a specific brand name using the country's infrastructure, and this was precisely what Wiki Katat was looking for. The search for an alternative for internet access in Mexico is also the result of a concentrated telecom system. The major cell phone companies in the country control about 97% of the sector. Under a profits logic, these companies do not offer services for many rural or impoverished areas. Despite the need, there was a barrier to the creation of a non-profit indigenous operator in Mexico, lack of resources to establish a partnership with Redes, and finally being able to operate. That is when these young people saw an open call for the Local Networks Initiative and decided to participate.
Empezamos a ver lo del formulario, empezamos a llenarlo y todos aportando ideas con los compañeros de redes, nosotros. Y Adri nos decía, esta es la buena para tener Wiki Katat. Y nosotros sí.
We began to look at the form and to fill it out then, and everyone contributing ideas between our network partners, and Adri told us, this is the good one to get Wiki Katat. And we would said, yes, and we crossed our fingers, hopefully and yes. So I remember very well when Adri arrived later and told me, I've already received an email, and we went on to the second phase and then to the third phase, and that was when we saw the sun, and we were very happy. From here, from the Tosepan Union of Co-ops and from the council, we said, yes, we are going to be a virtual, social and community mobile operator.
La tercera fase fue cuando vimos el sol y estábamos felices y pues desde aquí, desde la Unión de Cooperativas Tosepan y el Consejo, dijimos, sí se va a firmar el convenio, sí vamos a ser operadores móvil virtual, social y comunitario.
And this is how Wiki Katat was born. Today, they offer cell phone and mobile internet services in many different plans at low cost. Aside from Puebla and Veracruz, the carrier is present in other Mexican states, such as Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Michoacán, besides Mexico City. It also intends to reach other communities. In these places, it's possible to access services through their own operator and buy mobile chips, but the service doesn't work in the entire national territory. In the areas of the country where their operator is not present, Wiki Katat uses a remote connection through roaming in Altan's shared 4.5G network to keep offering its services. Wiki Katat also has a server for its users in which videos and photos are stored alongside other materials produced by the communities on their festivities, traditions, dances, corn growth, coffee and pepper picking. Called Tawaloni, this communication service presents the perspectives of the communities in their own native languages. If you're curious to check it out, we will add a link to their website on the description of this episode. From her own personal life story, Flor learned that it's possible to always keep on working for a better life.
Y hay algo que a mí me ha marcado mucho es que pasa aquí en las comunidades o en los pueblos indígenas.
There is something that has touched me a lot. It is that I know it happens here in the communities and among indigenous peoples, and I'm talking about Quetzalan, my territory, but I'm also talking about all the indigenous community in Mexico and all Latin American countries. I'm sure that for many women, it's not that we don't want to use technology. It's that sometimes we don't have the resources. Because sometimes we live far from a university or far from having access to what the networks are, you know? And so that is why we at Tosepan Radio are thinking a lot about how to integrate new women, and that Wiki Katat and that the networks are just a way to meet other women and to become visible and say that women can do it too.
Que Wiki Katat, que las redes sean solo un pretexto para reencontrarnos con otras mujeres y ser visibles, ¿no? Y decir, las mujeres también podemos, sí.
Lilian Chamorro Rojas is also part of Wiki Katat history. She is a telecom and electronic engineer who has worked for many years with community networks in Latin America through organizations such as Colnodo in Colombia and Redes AC in Mexico. We also talked to her in a video call. Lilian was in the town of Pupiales in Colombia.
Hola Lilian.
Hola Vivian, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Muy bien, gracias.
Through her experience with community networks, Lilian highlights a fundamental aspect in these processes, the creation of shared dreams for the future.
Bueno, son procesos que cada comunidad los llama de diferente manera. En Colombia se habla mucho de los planes de vida, sobre todo en las comunidades indígenas. Es un proceso de...
These are processes that each community names in a different way. In Colombia, one talks a lot in terms of life plans, especially in indigenous communities. It's a process of collective construction, let's say, where the community is gathered around bonfires, including sacred places, to talk about what is really important for them, about what they have to improve their needs as a community. From there, new lines of work are established.
Para la comunidad, sobre lo que se tiene que mejorar, sobre las necesidades que existen en la comunidad, y a partir de esto se plantean como unas líneas de trabajo.
She explains that no matter how they name it, a lot of communities have their collective dreams as common ground.
No todos los territorios los tienen planes de vida escritos, ¿no? O trabajados de cierta manera, pero incluso en territorios donde no hay un plan de vida tan elaborado.
Not all territories have clear life plans, written down or somehow worked on. But even in territories where there is no clear elaborate life plan, one can still see if they have dreams in common, shared needs and shared dreams. And such shared dreams, which end up becoming little strategies, little plans, start shaping the future, and that's our starting point, right?
Y esos sueños compartidos pues se van convirtiendo también en pequeñas estrategias, pequeños planes que se van pensando a futuro, y desde allí es desde donde partimos, ¿no?
One of Wiki Katat's fronts is strengthening cultural identity and the indigenous community's cosmovision. What happened in Mexico is very common in other indigenous communities in Latin America.
Hay unos procesos comunicativos que se dan en los territorios y que cuando empezamos a también tener en cuenta como ya otras tecnologías, otras formas de comunicación, pues estos afianzan aún más, ¿no?
There are communications processes that take place in the territories, and we also start to take into account how there are other technologies and other forms of communication, since these further strengthen and even expand the possibilities of being able to share local knowledge, of being able to sustain the identity of the territories, which are part of the life plans of many communities, let alone the strategies used by many communities. Because a lot of these life plans we find is that one of the major concerns, for example, is the loss of identity, or that the young generations will no longer be interested in the local knowledge or in forms of knowledge that exist in the community. So, how can we make sure certain forms of knowledge are preserved and continue to be passed on? Well, it's through communication that such task may be achieved in different ways, right? From the arts to the new technologies, we are able to collect and gather histories, having all the information properly stored in digital media and also shared via the networks.
Maneras, ¿no? Que se puede dar desde el arte hasta las nuevas tecnologías, permitiéndonos recopilar historias, permitiéndonos tener toda esta información ya almacenada en estos medios digitales y compartirla también, ¿no? A través de las redes.
And this is the end of our episode. If you want to know more about Wiki Katat, look up their website, which we will post in the description of this episode. If you have liked this podcast, please recommend it to those you know will appreciate it as well. You can follow the season on the main podcast platforms or on APC's website, routingforcommunities.apc.org. There you also find materials to learn more about these experiences. We will meet again soon with the new experiences and stories from community-led networks that are also connected to our lives. Next episode, the 4th of the season, we will travel once again to South Africa. Over there, you get to know more about a Madiba Community Network's experience located in the so-called Wild Coast. This story shows how access to the internet via community networks strengthens the fights for rights in a community in an abundantly luscious nature that has been threatened by titanium mining. You listen to the 3rd episode of Routing for Communities, an audio journey tracing community connectivity around the world. This is the podcast of the Local Networks Initiative, a collective effort led by the Association for Progressive Communications, APC, and Rhizomatica. Production, Rádio Tertúlia. In this episode, you have listened to audio content from KGET News. Thanks and see you next time.